So now I begin the discussion of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Well, let's first understand what trauma is. Now, I know you all heard about trauma, and particularly you heard about post-traumatic stress disorder after 9/11. Now, I'm going to submit to you that we knew what trauma was before 9/11. And what people will say, because, I even have people on the radio show, because they say, yeah, but y'all free now. Why are you tripping? Get over it. You know what I'm saying? It's done. You're free. That's what people will tell you, right? And it's interesting, our response, because to me that's an easy response. They say, let's enjoy. I wasn't a slave owner. I didn't do it. I wasn't there. I'm tired of hearing about this. I'm tired of feeling guilty about it. And what I say to those folks is, you know what? I wasn't there either. I'm not a slave, far as I know. None of my cousins, friends, and associates are slaves. However, we have to understand that approximately 300 years of protracted slavery guaranteed that the progeny of the South, the white progeny, would have wealth and prosperity and privilege. And it guaranteed that the descendants of those stolen away would have debt, servitude, fear, and misery. So it doesn't matter if either of us were there. That is what it produced today. Be clear. And then they say, but Joy, I didn't do it. I marched in the civil rights movement. I said, so what you're saying is that you do not enjoy the rights and privileges of white people. As this white person because when they come up and they tell you, there's another couple out there that want this loan, but they're black. I'm going to give it to you, okay? Just between you and me. You're going to say, no. I don't want that privilege. No. I don't want to. Oh, no, I know I could probably get a better deal, but don't give it to me. Do you enjoy that privilege? Do you not then also support and sustain the system? Because it's like you break my leg and get mad at me because I limp. So you yourself, but I didn't break your leg, Joy. I said, but did you support, sustain, vote in, and maintain the system that guaranteed your privilege, that created the pothole that I fell in that broke my leg? But y'all free. So let's look at trauma. What we understand about trauma, and there's a physiology of trauma. I'm not going to bother to get into that. But I'm going to talk a little bit about it so we can have a working knowledge of when people start talking about trauma, what they're speaking of. Now, trauma, people always say to me, well, Joy, there were happy slaves. Yeah, we're going to find them. I said, but that's okay. I'm going to give that to you, because I'm sure there were some. We got some happy slaves now, don't we? So I know they had to be there. We got black overseers, don't we? Okay. And any of you want a point of reference, look at that, the movie Sankofa. So you can understand the notion of the injury to the black overseer. But when I look at this whole idea of trauma, you have to understand that, in fact, everyone's not traumatized by traumatic events. When those buildings fell, there were folks that weren't there, that heard about it, that saw it on the other side of the country that were traumatized. They can't get on an airplane now because they were traumatized. There were folks that were close enough to smell the bodies. They were traumatized. There were people whose loved ones were in that building who were traumatized. And there are people who escaped it, saw it fall down, narrowly escaped it, and weren't traumatized. So everyone is not traumatized by trauma. Okay, we all have what is known as a differential response to trauma, the traumatic event. But what we have to understand is what it produces. So the first thing I did in my research is I wanted to find out who exactly gets this, the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is a book called The Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Anybody know what that is? If you got insurance, you better figure out what that is. Because that's what they're trying to find a diagnosis to get paid. Okay. Let me tell you what this book said when they identified the groups of people that we accept. Victims of rape have post-traumatic stress disorder. War veterans, Holocaust victims, and their descendants, as a matter of fact. We have heart attack victims, victims of natural disaster, victims of severe accidents. And I kind of looked for a while. I said, they don't have slaves in there anywhere. So when I spoke to my professors, which is the reason why I don't want you to know that I'm obsessed with education. I have 2 master's degrees because when I was going for my master's degree in clinical psych, actually I was going to get a PhD. And when I started asking questions around this, it got a little warm. So I knew I wasn't going to get a dissertation out of them. So I had to get up out of there because I started asking some questions about why slaves weren't there, and they started giving me answers like, well, that was too long ago. This is a diagnosis that requires a certain period of time, maybe a few years or, some years, but that's just far too long ago for anyone. I said, okay, I'm with that. Well, let's read a little bit about what it looks like, this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. How do people behave? Marked diminished interest or participation in significant activities, feelings of detachment or estrangement from others, restricted range of affect, meaning the person is unable to have loving feelings, sense of foreshortened future, does not expect to have a career, marriage, children, or a normal lifespan. Difficulty falling or staying asleep, irritability or outbursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, hypervigilance, meaning watchfulness, attentiveness, wariness, mindfulness, alertness, and vigilance, exaggerated startle response. Now let me explain something. In order to get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which by the way is treatable by medication, it generally works. You don't have to have all those symptoms. You only need a few of them to get the diagnosis, okay? Just a few of those, the kind of things that, the symptomology. So now what we're going to do is become diagnosticians. We're going to go back and considering the fact that there were some percentage of happy slaves, we're going to let you have that number. We're going to let you have that number. I want to now look at perhaps the injured slave. Now I want you to tell me based on these conditions or these diagnostic features, whether you think a good percentage of the slaves might have had them. Not all of them, not the happy ones. Okay? Number 1, a serious threat or harm to one's life or physical integrity. Do the slaves get that one? Okay. Threat or harm to one's children, spouse, or close relatives. Sudden destruction of one's home or community. Seeing another person injured, killed as a result of accident or physical violence. Learning about a serious threat to a close friend, a relative kidnapped, tortured, or killed. Stressors experienced with intense fear, terror, and helplessness. Disorder is considered to be more serious and will last longer when the stressor is of human design. That's 7 out of 7. You think some of them might have had it. Now, what I want to ask you now, because this is an important question, because y'all are afraid. Okay? Do you think or remember any time when we got that free therapy after slavery? Do you ever remember when they said, line on up, we're going to do a group thing or something with you? Do you remember that? Didn't happen, right? And then, of course, the response is, yes, but you're free now. Now, I want you to remember I told you about the person with hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, all that? That was Mama raising Johnny. Now, here's the question. Now, we're going to move from slavery into after slavery. But let's start looking at the nature of these traumas so we can get up close and personal. It gets a little gory here because I want you to know we got to tell the truth. And it amazes me how many people, when I start talking about what occurred during slavery, it amazes me how people want to leave out certain things. And the reason why I'm saying this is an interesting thing, because you notice how many children go missing and stuff like that? Or you know how many pedophiles show up all of a sudden? They the teacher, they the gym coach, they the all these folks. That's kind of happening a lot, right? And you know what? You know, the Dahmers are showing up. Gacy, you know, cutting up the bodies, putting them under. You know, you notice how all these folks kind of, you also know what they look like, right? Okay, but all right. Just stay with me. Stay with me. Can you imagine those people who know socially this is deviant behavior? It does not meet with the norm, right? This is something that is taboo. But you see, during slavery, you didn't have to worry about that upsetting the social order, now did you? You didn't have to be questioned on your moral conduct because you could buy your pathology. You could buy it at 2. And you could do what you wanted with it for as long as you wanted to, anytime you wanted to, with absolute impunity. There was nothing to be done. You could buy what you wanted. And we don't want to think about that sick, maniacal person that bought it. But you know they did. You know they did. But we don't mention them. We talk about the happy master. They gave the happy slaves nice quarters and treated them kindly. That's what we talk about. And yet we see a pervasive number of those people that are doing that now. They did it then. But then some of you may say, well, I don't know. Is that written somewhere, Joy? So let's go to what is written. There are a couple of books if you want. You know, so many people, it's interesting how we get hung up on things. You know, people have questioned the Willie Lynch story. I don't care. You can question it if you like. Maybe throw it out if you want. Get 100 Years of Lynching, the book. And you get the newspaper accounts. It makes Willie Lynch look silly. Okay? And if you want the pictorial, you know, without sanctuary. It's not table reading, but if you want to see it, it's there. Okay, so we don't have to worry about whether the people want to substantiate it, because, you know, that's the first thing they do. And they find someone that's black, too, unsubstantiated, by the way. But let's look at what the law said. There's a book called Southern Slavery and the Law. And the one thing that's written about this is written by a man named, last name is Thomas, Southern Slavery and the Law. What's interesting about this is the opening chapter talks about the preoccupation with the black male penis size. You know how we keep talking about the myth and this and all that? Their whole first chapter devoted to the preoccupation with the male genitalia, which may explain why shortly after being lynched, they were castrated. But let's look at what the law says. And if any slave resists his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave and shall be happen to be killed in such correction, it shall not be accounted felony. But the master, owner, and every other such person so giving correction shall be acquit of all punishment and accusation for the same as if such accident had never happened. That's called the Casual Killing Act. That means if you happen to be beating your slave and you beat him to death, it couldn't be considered a felony. It was simply an accident while correcting the slave. And that sounds like painfully familiar to us around excessive use of force, right? And we start looking at the appropriate use of force and how many of us end up dead because that was the amount of force that they needed to correct. But let's look at this even closer. Why would you beat a slave to death? Well, you couldn't fine them because they had no money. You didn't want them to get jailed because then their labor is you. So you must beat them severely in order for them to submit. The slave, inherent in the process, was violence, you see. And they say, we're violent. But who pushed whom first?
This is divine judgment. America is under judgment, not by man, but by God himself. The same God who judged Egypt, who judged Babylon, who judged Rome, is now weighing America in the balance and finding her wanting. America has sown destruction, and now it reaps decline. It has sown arrogance, and now it reaps humiliation. It has sown lies, and now it reaps truth, truth that cannot be hidden anymore. America is a land built on blood, on the sweat and suffering of the people it has enslaved, displaced, and silenced. But tell that truth today, and they call it divisive. They call it unpatriotic. They want you to believe that history is just a collection of dates and figures, stripped of the brutality, the deception, the theft. They tell you the Trail of Tears was just relocation, that the Colfax Massacre, Wilmington Coup and Massacre, Rosewood Massacre, Atlanta Race Massacre, Ocoee Massacre, Tulsa Massacre, Harlem Race Massacres of 1943 and 1964 was just riots, and that Jim Crow was merely a setback. What they refuse to admit is that America was never a nation of freedom. It was a nation of conquest, built on white supremacy, and it has never stopped being one. And that is why they are so desperate to erase the past. You see, history, real history, has power. It reveals the truth of this nation, of what was done and what is still being done. They call it critical race theory today, but it's just the truth, and that's why they fight so hard to bury it. From school boards banning books, to politicians scrubbing slavery from textbooks, to social media platforms silencing voices that dare speak honestly about America's past. White supremacy is culturally ingrained into every aspect of white society, in the home, school, religion, and politics. But tell me, what does it say about a people who fear history? It says they know their hands are bloody, and they are terrified that their children will ask them why. Because the truth would destroy their illusion of innocence. The same way it did when the world saw Black Wall Street burn. The same way it did when Jim Crow's chains were exposed for what they were. The same way it did when the Southern strategy was revealed as a blueprint for racial control, not democracy. But America has always had a strategy. Slave patrols became the police. Redlining became modern real estate steering. The plantation became the prison. And now, they want to act like none of it happened. They want to rewrite history to keep future generations obedient, ignorant, docile. And yet, what they don't understand is that you cannot erase pain. You cannot erase memory. You cannot erase the reality of people who have suffered and endured. This nation made laws to steal land from Native people. The Homestead Act gave free land to whites while barring Black freedmen Americans from ownership. The Immigration Act of 1924 made sure America remained a white country, closing its doors to those it deemed unfit. And when we, Black freedmen Americans, dared to build wealth, dared to thrive, they sent mobs, they sent bombs, they sent laws disguised as justice to tear down Black freedmen Americans' communities. And it wasn't enough for them to unalive us. They had to erase us. They built highways through our neighborhoods, turning communities into ghettos. They passed California Proposition 14 to uphold segregation. They used COINTELPRO to assassinate Black leaders. They used the daughters of Confederates to put Confederate statues in our faces, not in 1865, but during the Civil Rights Movement, as a warning, as a message. And still, they want us to believe in their version of America, an America where slavery was a misunderstanding, where the Tuskegee experiment was a footnote, where mass incarceration is just an accident. No, sir. No, ma'am. White supremacy is in the bones of this country, in the schools, the churches, the homes, the politics. It is a disease, and they refuse to cure it. But there is something they should fear more than the truth being known. They should fear what happens when the next generation realizes they have been lied to. What happens when young people of all colors understand that history was stolen from them, that their textbooks were propaganda, that their teachers were ordered to deceive. A people who know they have been deceived do not trust, and a people who do not trust begin to question everything. That is what America fears most, not the past, but the reckoning it demands. And that reckoning is coming. No matter how many books they ban, no matter how many voices they silence, no matter how many lies they tell, truth is like a flame. It spreads. And once it touches the people, it cannot be extinguished. The question is not whether America will reckon with its past. The question is whether America will survive what it has done. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.